This is part two of creating Laravel bundles. This is part two of building Laravel bundles with TDD. Last time we started our bundle and we created it from the ground up. We put it under version control with Git, bootstrapped it into Laravel, and then created the two files that you see on the screen. On the left side is the filter class itself, and on the right side are the corresponding unit tests. Right now, the only thing the filter class does is instantiate if there is a non-falsy value passed in. This time we're going to focus on writing tests to drive out the rest of the functionality of the filter class. So the first thing I'd like to start out with is creating the setup and teardown methods which PHPUnit knows to execute before and after every test is run respectively. The line above, line 3, bundle start action filter, this could be placed into setup and it would execute fine, but it would execute before every test instead of being executed once. And while Laravel has the conventions to prevent that from happening, it's still very misleading to whoever's reading your tests, and it's not the right way to use that method. So anything you need executed once before the test suite is run, put it outside your class. Anything that you need executed before every test, put it inside a setup. So let's go ahead and create public function setup, and then we'll assign this to a new property called filter, and we'll make this the same as below. We're going to create a new filter. We're going to pass in test to it, and then public function teardown can be used. Let's go ahead and set it to null. You could also unset it, but it ultimately doesn't matter that much. And my typing is atrocious. I apologize for that. So in order to have a way to verify that this works, let's go ahead and do this filter. Okay, let's give it a test. And it passed. So let's make it that if we pass a filter object a list of actions, it can determine if it is relevant to the current action. Now we can do that by checking if the current action is in the list of actions or if it is not in the list of actions. I think if we write some tests that will help clear it up a little bit better than what I'm saying, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's make a public function test that can apply scope. And this filter should scope to only new. And now we want to make an assertion that this is true, that this filter is scoped. Alright, so if we run this test right now, we should get an error. Yep, their scope is undefined. So let's go to this side and make public function scope, and that takes a scope and actions. And that's plural because this is going to get cached, it's going to get casted to a array anyway. So I'll explain that in a minute. And we know that if this action exists, then scope is not going to exist now. So let's go ahead and make public function scoped. Okay, and now we get a failure that null is true. So at this point, we know it's a logic problem. So let's go ahead and make the scope function fleshed out. Let's do if actions is present and the current scope is in the array only and except, then it is now scoped. And I'm not entirely sure I want that inline array there, but for now it works, and if we find out we don't like it there later, we can come back and refactor. So let's assign the property scope to the scope we pass in, which is only in our test. And then we'll do the same for actions, but we have to make sure we cast it to an array. That way the string new that we passed in will get cast to an array containing the string new. So let's wrap this up. And if we still get a failure, we didn't make any syntax errors, so that's good. Alright, so scope is set up, and now we have to determine if the scope is there. And this can be done just by returning this scope or this actions. Okay, and our test pass. So that's what we wanted to see, and now we have to determine relevancy. So let's go ahead and make a new test for determining if we can test the relevancy of the only that we just declared. Relevance of, wow, only. So we're going to do the same thing we did above, scope only new. And then instead of asserting whether it's, asserting that it is scoped, we already know it's scoped, so let's do this filter is relevant to new. And something I just want to point out briefly is that this statement and a lot of the ones I'm making kind of read in English manner. So like this filter is relevant to new. That's something you should try to aim for. It doesn't have to read like real English. We're not trying to recreate COBOL, but it should describe to your users what you're doing. So that's something I try to aim for, and I think that's really what Laravel is about. It's about making simple and easy to use APIs. So, so now this test is made. Let's see if this passes, and we should get, yep, relevant is undeclared. So let's make public function relevant action. And now we should get a failure that null is true. So just to cap it off at the bottom, we're going to return false by default. Now we get false is true. So we have three cases of relevancy that we have to handle. And we're going to start off with just the ones that we know about right now. So if there is no scope, so if this is not scoped, then we can return true by default. Okay. We'll run the test again, still false. So if the current action, or I'm sorry, if the current scope is only, and the current action is in the array actions, then we do want to return true because it is relevant. So let's see if our test passes, and we're good. The test is passing, so now we need another test for our other case, which is except. So I guess just to make this easy, copy and paste. So except, and we want to switch this to accept. And we want to assert that it is false, that it is relevant to new. So we have to make two assertions here. We're going to have to assert that it's relevant or not relevant to new. However, it needs to be relevant to create or some other action. So let's test this now. And we get a failure that false is true. So let me just demonstrate why I did that right away. We test that it's relevant to new. It's because except is already, or I'm sorry, I blanked out the wrong one there. If we assert that it's true to this, it's going to be false. So we need to, we have to create our code here. So, sorry, I jumbled myself up a little bit. So if this scope is except and in array, or I'm sorry, and it's not in the array actions, then it is true. Oops. Alright, so now I get a passing assertion. I do need to assert that it is false to new. Alright, so there we go. It will not return true if we test its relevancy against new, because we told it to ignore new. So that's all set. And now we have our relevancy checks in place, and we can now determine scope fully. At this point, we probably want to enter the third part of the cycle, which is red, green, refactor. So we want to refactor this code a little bit. And the reason I want to do that is I currently have 4 exit points in the relevant method, and I'd like to clean that up. So let's pop back over to our relevant method, and let's start off by creating a relevant variable. We're going to assign it to true, and we're going to return this variable at the bottom of the method. We're only going to return in 1 point, and I don't always aim for that, but in this method I think is appropriate. Now we'll remove the negation on checking for the scope, and we're going to create a temporary variable called action present, and this is going to store the value of whether the action is in the actions array. That way we're only checking once. Then I'm going to create a variable called only that is going to hold the value of the conditional below. So if this scope is equal to only and action present, then that will be true. And the reason I'm using the double equals here instead of the written out form of and is because we're going to get into a weird order of operations conflict in this situation, so I'd rather just not have to deal with that during the screencast. So then we're going to create the except version of this. So, whoops. So if the scope is except and the action is not present, that'll return true. And then we're going to set relevant equal to only or except. And then if all is well, we just return relevant. And I think that'll take care of it. So let's blow this away and see if we made the right assertions. And our test still passed, so that's good. So now to put one final assertion in here. Whoops. I would like to make a matching one over on this side. So we'll say assert false that it is relevant to, let's pick edit this time. And our test will pass, and we're good to go. Alright, so I think that's it for this class. Next time I'm going to walk through creating the filterable trait, and that's going to handle dealing with all the controller-based logic. So I'm thinking this will wrap up next screencast, and then we'll move on to new things, but I think that's good for now. So I hope you enjoyed the screencast. Leave me any feedback if you want anything different, or if you like what I'm doing, just let me know how everything is, and I'll see you next time.